One of the most legendary news people in modern journalism died this week. Longtime Washington Post executive editor Ben Bradlee passed away at the age of 93. His brusque and charismatic manner, combined with a laser-sharp wit and zest for news, made him the ultimate power broker in a city of power brokers. Ben Bradlee was Boston-born and went to Harvard, roots that served him well in Washington when he became fast friends with then Congressman John F. Kennedy, just as his journalism career was getting started. By 1968, Bradlee was executive editor of the Post, and then came the Pentagon Papers. He and publisher Katharine Graham famously celebrated as the Supreme Court ruled they had the right to publish. That was a precursor to Watergate.
The Post was still looking for a seat at the big table. We weren't at the big table yet, and we very much wanted to go there.
Watergate not only brought the Washington Post to the big table, they took the head seat. Bradlee and two intrepid reporters named Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein became household names.
Every day, the White House, the leader of the free world, his spokesman would get up and attack the Washington Post, attack Ben Bradlee by name, attack Woodward and myself, and he backed us up.
Watergate transformed journalism, memorialized in the classic film All the President's Men, with Jason Robards playing Bradlee.
Nothing's riding on this except the First Amendment of the Constitution, freedom of the press, and maybe the future of the country.
Ben Bradlee was tough, ornery, and foul-mouthed, but a man so charismatic, it's been said, women wanted to be with him and men wanted to be him.
I'm surrounded by people who make sure that nothing goes to my head.
Married to Washington's socialite and one-time Style section reporter Sally Quinn, Bradlee made that section a must-read.
It was the first section a lot of people read, including men.
Bradlee will be remembered at a service at Washington's National Cathedral in early November. You know, he just came from that era. We were talking about this on the radio today, that World War II generation. He was in the Navy, served the country, and then started into journalism. Eric Sevareid and Walter Cronkite and that whole genre of journalists. And really, Ben is at the tail end of those. People that were household names for decades and will be for decades to come. And that whole generation is just disappearing. I think that's one of the things I find so poignant about this, other than I only met Ben a few times, half a dozen times maybe, but he was one of those ones that, and it wasn't that he was boisterous, wasn't that he was the life of the party, but he was just a showstopper when he came into the room by everything he had to say, by his presence. Everybody wanted to listen, everybody wanted to be near him, everybody wanted to sort of have a piece of Ben.
One of a kind, no question about it. But I think one of the things that he contributed to our society that we don't think about very much is that most people don't really have a picture of how newsrooms and news organizations work. And this was a first chance to see the kind of power that an editor has. Because usually you think of just the reporter, the person whose name is on the story. And this was a case where you really saw how powerful the person is who picks the reporters, although he always argued he didn't pick the reporters, that Woodward and Bernstein were the two guys that were there on Saturday because they didn't have any seniority. So they were there, they got to do the work. But he clearly made amazing choices along the way about how to pursue that story, and keeping the old reporters off the story, so that was his big role, was not letting anybody else into that story, leaving it with the two guys who were doing the work. To me, that's one of the things that really makes him important, is that he presented to the community, to the world, what an editor should be doing.
I was fascinated because, of course, I know who Ben Bradlee is and his legacy and all of that, and I've been reading the tributes. But I was very interested in Richard Prince's comments. Richard Prince writes a column called Journalisms, and he was one of what was dubbed the Metro Seven. These were black reporters that took the Post before the Equal Opportunity Commission to complain about racial issues in the Post. At the same time that Bradlee was the big editor, women also sued the paper. And one of them was quoted, and she said, like so many people of his class and era, he thought suing your employer was basically rude, and unions were there only to protect the incompetent. But both groups of people, Richard, outside of himself, interviewed other black reporters, had a great respect for him as an editor, and thought that that was not overhyped, that he had a skill and a talent that was good. What I wanted to say was he struggled with the issue of race himself. They have him on tape talking about this with some other top editors. And here's a great quote that I thought was just really interesting. He said, I was just struck by some people who were very intelligent that I appreciated thinking that I was racist, and that bothered me. But I also had to understand that people, I didn't have any experience interacting with black folks, and so this was my first time, and I'm working hard to change that. So that's interesting too. So he acknowledged that he had much to learn in that arena. Megan, who was the woman in this, said he never acknowledged that with women, but he, the suit got resolved and things changed. So there you go.
Hey, it did work for a while. He worked for Katharine Graham. He had to suck it up.
Yeah.
Another thing that was different was that era. Yeah. I mean, you had kind of this era of the heroic editor. Ben Bradlee, he was by far and above everyone else in terms of public profile, but you had Abe Rosenthal at the New York Times, you even had Tom Winship at the Boston Globe. And I think that it was because these papers were much more closely held than they are today. You weren't answering to shareholders. You didn't have to watch the budget as much as you do today. I don't know whether it would be possible to have another Ben Bradlee today. You look at some of the leading editors today, like Marty Baron and Dean Baquet at the New York Times. They're very good editors, but they're much more managerial and team-oriented than the previous generation.
Well, I'm going to quote somebody too, David Carr in the New York Times, writing about, this is a great line. He said that Ben Bradlee did things, he went to war, he loved early and often, befriended and took on presidents, swore like a sailor, partied like a movie star, and then he said he clanked when he walked. Yeah. And Bradlee apparently did not hire a reporter because that reporter did not clank when he walked.
I was going to use that as my outline. I was going to say he clanked when he walked.
He was a bigger-than-life guy. And to your point, I think he said himself that he could not have been an editor in this age of cutbacks and cutbacks, that he doubled the staff at the Post between the time he came and the time he left. So bigger than life, it makes me nostalgic for a different sort of newspaper era.
Exactly.
Callie, he was also one of those editors who really reached down to, he was devoted to diversity. And at least in his later years.
Yes. And he had that disaster with Janet Cook, who was the Pulitzer Prize-winning African-American.
Right.
But he made up the whole story.
He would find people who didn't come up through normal channels, and he loved doing that because it was iconoclastic, like he was.